look, I'm fully on board with what you are saying if they had done that, but they don't do that. So that is a problem with the show. Welcome back to Nerd Legion. We are here to round out season 2 of Severance DoA. We're very complimentary. Yes. Our last episode covered all of season 1 and then also the first 3 episodes of season 2. So we will be discussing how the season ended and our thoughts. We were quite glowing in terms of our praise. I think I will be dialing back that praise somewhat as we discuss the rest of season 2, because there are aspects of it which I thought were very good and aspects that I thought were pretty ridiculous. And also, in my opinion, there was quite a bit of filler in the second part of this season, and the show kind of dragged somewhat. But I'm sure we'll get to that. How did you find it?
I liked it a lot. I don't feel like I liked it any less after seeing the whole season than I did after seeing the first 3 episodes, right? I don't think my thoughts on it really have changed that much. I will agree that it maybe did meander a little bit at times compared to the first season, but I kind of saw the meandering as potentially set up for things to come in the future. This is the type of show that I don't feel like does a lot of stuff without a very specific intent behind it. So I'm thinking the things that felt like they meandered have a reason down the road. At least that's what I'm hoping anyway. But either way, I don't feel like there was a ton of that. I thought it was a really great season. I'm looking forward to hearing what you took issue with. But either way, I think it's one of the best things I've seen on television in a long time. Can we even call it television anymore? Nobody watches, like, it's not really television. It's small screen, but it's not really television anymore, is it? Like, you kind of, sometimes you watch it on a TV, sometimes you watch it on a monitor.
Prestige
like TVs
TV
are essential.
is the name
I
for
guess.
it, right?
Prestige TV. Wow. That's how like, ooh, I would like to watch some Prestige TV, please. What's prestige about it? Well, you get to pay more per month for it than you would watching it on network television. Ooh.
Well, you're just paying for it differently, right? You're now, instead of paying for one cable package, we just pay for 5 different streaming services at any given point in time.
Yeah, but there was a time where it was just network television and nobody paid for it. You paid the electricity that went to your TV, and that was about it.
And the antenna that went on your house.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You didn't have to pay anything, I mean, you paid through, I don't know, like advertisers paid them so that you could watch it for free and then go tell your parents to buy He-Man action figures for you.
And now we have this really awesome system where we pay for it, a streaming subscription, and then they also put ads into it at the same time.
Right. If you don't pay enough for it, they'll put ads into it. And then sometimes it doesn't matter how much you pay for it because they put ads right in the show for it instead, So there's no escape. There's no escape sometimes. Sometimes
shout out Madam Web Pepsi advertisements.
Shout out to Strange New World Season 2 telling us to Bing it.
Although I will say, to bring it back to Severance, one of the nice things about Severance is that because nobody has a smartphone in Severance, there are no actual Apple products. Apple actually did not put iPhones or iPads in Severance, which is very nice. There is no Apple product placement.
All of that is in the making of stuff, where they're very, very clear that everything was done with Apple products, right? Edited on all the Apple products, you name it, right? Slept in the Apple apartments. It's kind of like, Apple might be kind of an analog for Lumon in a way, but in the in sort of a corporation where there's like cult-like aspects to it, maybe people are very committed to the products. They kind of live
the stark
nearby.
white minimalist hallways.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any like subtle commentary going on there, but one wonders. One wonders. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that came up recently is that Apple announced that they are renewing Severance for season 3, which shouldn't surprise anybody. This is one of the cultural touchstones of the moment in terms of television. We've seen references absolutely everywhere, newspaper articles and major newspapers like the New York Times all about Severance. The other show that probably would be very, I would say, culturally relevant right now is White Lotus. But this is up there, so it's not really a surprise that this would get renewed, especially because Apple TV Plus doesn't have a lot going on since Ted Lasso, I was going to say ended, but now they announced a season 4 for that, which is just extremely confusing because the show is over and I don't want a season 4 of Ted Lasso. In fact, season 3 was pretty garbage of Ted Lasso after the first 2 seasons were very enjoyable.
Man,
it's not.
I was gonna start watching that show, but now
season 1 and 2 are great. Okay, the first 2 seasons are great, but season 3 it does take a pretty
it sounds
big nose
like the Mandalorian thing. It sounds like the Mandalorian thing where it was supposed to end after 2 seasons. And then they were like, Grogu's too popular, make a 3rd season, and then that did not go great. First 2 seasons were really good, I thought. 3rd season, not so much. Didn't need it. Ended just fine after season 2. And now we got a movie coming, so yeah, anyway, that's our Star Wars chat for the episode. Let's move on to Severance, a much better show than and pretty much all of the Star Wars stuff that's been made, except for Andor. Andor, I like Andor better than Severance, but it's apples to oranges. You know, they're doing different things.
And we will be doing Andor season 2 soon, guys, when that starts to be released. So we will be focusing on that. Don't you worry. It is coming out in April, so that'll be quite soon. Now, if you've spent the last few years carrying around that brick of a wallet in your pocket, now may be the best time to get yourself a brand new Ridge wallet since they're sponsoring Nerd Legion. Check this out. Mine is a very sturdy carbon fiber, and all you have to do to access your cards is push up this little notch and grab them out of the top. It can hold up to 12 cards. I use it for my credit card, driver's license, anything else you want, debit card. Now, flip it around, and there's where your cash sits with a money strap or money clip. They also have AirTag holders so that you can make sure you never lose your wallet. And of course, Ridge has free shipping, a 99-day risk-free trial, and a lifetime warranty on all their products. So now is a great time to upgrade. It is incredibly slim, so it just slips into your pocket so you don't have to have a big bulge in your jeans. Besides the one you have naturally, of course, since you watch this show. Anyway, for a limited time, our listeners get 10% off at Ridge by using code NERD, that's NERD, at checkout. Just head to ridge.com and use code NERD, and you're all set. After purchase, they will ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them Nerd Legion sent you. Again, the best way to support Nerd Legion is to support our sponsors on the show. So head on over to Ridge, get yourself a new key case, a new wallet, whatever your heart desires. Tell them Nerd Legion sent you. Thanks a lot. Back to Severance. We did, interestingly, pick... we picked the first 3 episodes because typically we do the first few episodes, and if we like the show, we'll come back and finish it off. And so we did... I would say stop at a kind of awkward time because the very next episode, episode 4, was the Ort Bowl, or where they were the episode called Woe's Hollow, where they are trying, they're taken out into nature in upstate New York. And then
what an episode.
Walking through the life of Kier, which is very interesting. And obviously we're going to talk about spoilers here. So if you don't want them, turn it off. But that is also the reveal that Helly was actually Helena Egan. So it was her outie that was infiltrating the group for nefarious purposes, ends up actually sleeping with Mark Scout's innie. Now, we can discuss whether that was necessary. Also, why Helena Egan even did that is very questionable, and is also never explained in the show why Helena Egan would be the one doing that, which is confusing. And it feels like that was just actually, this is one of my complaints with the show, which is it feels like that was just inputted to create fake drama between Helena's innie, and Mark S.
You're like her? I don't know. I don't know who you are, I guess.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
And also to provide some sort of emotional catharsis and cause a confusing situation about the motives of or how Helly would feel about her outie sleeping with the man she was interested in, and create this very weird love triangle, which, by the way, is interesting. So I don't hate that they included these ideas, but I do think that Helena Egan sleeping with Mark S is both not explained and not something she would do. So it feels kind of weird for her character.
Something to drive a wedge between us. Like,
Helly,
I want to go for a walk.
Helly, I'm sorry. I thought it was you.
But it wasn't me.
It is interesting in that we can talk about Helena Egan being a less developed character, well, whereas Helly R, right? The innie is much more developed. But it's the same person, and it's essentially the same, character, but it's different, right? And that's the whole crux of this show, right? Is how much crossover is there? Are these like separate, real people that have the same rights as like their outies do and everything like that in a philosophical sense? So it did seem like kind of extra drama, but I just kind of chalked it up to the Egans kind of just generally being unbalanced, and they just do weird things, which we see them. So I was a little bit kind of like, well, what's the idea behind this? But maybe we'll get more of that in the future. Either way, it does cause drama and conversation, at least.
I mean, it creates the weird love triangle is what it does. But
Sure.
It felt like that was a means to an end rather than a believable thing that Helena Egan would actually do, because there's no impetus for her to do that, right? She could wait, she already has Mark S eating out of the palm of her hand effectively, and she doesn't have to do these things, and it doesn't advance her plot in any way.
Now, I actually think they do set this up, now that I think about it, because if I recall, it's like the first or the second episode, there's a scene of Helly E, watching the footage of her innie and Mark kissing over and over and over again. So it seems like she's kind of like, hey, I want to see if I can go in there and get some of that, I guess, is the idea, which is a messed up
these
kind
are
of Egan thing to do. But I
you're
felt like
making and have no bearing within the act. You are taking two unconnected points, and the show does not connect these things. And if you're Helena Egan, pretty sure you can get some from anybody you want because you are the billionaire heiress of a major multinational corporation.
You want Mark Scout.
Oh,
you were like,
okay,
I want to get with the creator of the Cones of Dunshire. That's who I want. So I think why else would they have that scene? Where she's clearly
your theory is
with
that Mark S's raw animal magnetism is the reason. Okay. I think that's bullshit. So
I think she's jealous of her innie's relationship because her outie is so messed up. She's incapable of having a normal relationship. So she wants to get in there and experience
if that's the case, then the show should demonstrate that instead of you just randomly guessing that that's the case. Which
it shows like her obsession with that
writing.
Moment.
It's called
like her
bad writing.
I think you're taking it too far. It shows her messed up relationship with her father. It shows her being really obsessed with that moment in particular in the security footage. I don't think it's not concrete. Sure, maybe they could have set it up a little bit better, but I think there is
it is
enough
purely a
in
guess
there
on your
to
part.
make
There is no exploration of these ideas within the show. It is a mechanism for them to throw drama into the Helly R Mark S relationship.
Sure, but I don't think it comes out of as nowhere as you're putting it out to be. I think they could have set it up better, but it doesn't come out completely out of nowhere.
She knows her innie is like interested in Mark S, but she doesn't actually have to act on that. And she certainly doesn't have to sleep with him. She could just kiss him.
Just do it for funsies.
Or, exactly.
We're talking about
she doesn't
Egan
need
here,
to do
though.
that.
Again.
And her character has, as repressed as she might be, look, I'm fully on board with what you are saying if they had done that, but they don't do that. So that is a problem with the show.
I'm curious. I don't feel like it's as big of a jump of logic as you're putting it out to be, but we can let the internet decide. Let us know in the comments who is right in this moment, right off the bat. Is it Monty
by the
or
way,
is it
it
DoA?
also
I will take whatever
nowhere.
result the community
Here's the other
says.
problem, is that it goes nowhere. It is never actually revisited by Helena Egan.
That
That's
is
the other problem.
True. and I kind of was never super interested in that subplot anyway, so I'm fine with that. But I agree that that is a little bit weird. Yeah.
Also, her dad would know about that, and don't you think her dad would be like, "Why are you sleeping with Mark S., who we need to complete this Cold Harbor file?"
I think the other thing to bring up is I don't know if it was ever totally explained how she was able to be an outie on the severed floor too, because they
do explain that there's the block within her mind. Yeah, so they have that technology.
Okay.
Yeah,
they do, because I know they can do it the reverse way, right? They can do the overtime protocol or whatever, but I don't. Yeah. I forgot they said they could do it the other way. Okay.
Yes,
that makes sense. I just couldn't remember that they did that. Okay, well, never mind. That's fine. No problems with that. Anyway, the episode was great though. Walking around in the forest, making Milchick angry, which
the
his
throwing the marshmallows away, which is very funny.
Yes.
Letting the marshmallows burn in the fire as punishment to them was very funny.
Throw them in the fire.
Mr. Milchick, come on.
Now, Miss Wong.
Why?
I know. Yeah, especially because Mark and Helly are just like laughing about it, because it really is like kids on a field trip, and they're disappointed, but they're kind of like laughing at how angry their teacher's getting too, you know. So it shows the immaturity of the innies. They are kind of relatively new human beings to a certain
they are
extent.
children, and they're treated like children. And I think that's the brilliance of it, is that the way they are treated, whether with the Chinese finger traps and the erasers and the stupid little prizes and the dance parties and the carved melon like people's heads. These are things that you would do for a child's party. And it just goes to show, when you have no other experiences, these things seem amazing because you don't know anything else.
But the extra interesting thing about that comparison is that those are all things that are done in real corporate environments around the world, especially around the nation, with fully grown adults too, who are also expected to be just as excited. And we all
everybody
know
hates it, obviously.
It's all exactly, we all hate it. But yet it all, when I worked in a corporate job for a time, like all that stuff was there. Like the idea that you'd work all month super hard for like a waffle party, like that's a very realistic corporate type thing. And then you're supposed to be like, yay, waffle party. It's like, I am a functioning adult. I could go buy hundreds of waffles right now and eat them in the comfort of my own home. Why would I want to eat a waffle in this less comfortable corporate environment, right? But yet they still do that to people as adults, you know? That's why I vowed to never work in corporate America ever again. But
it was the waffle
parties
that ended.
I was there for a little while. Well, no, that was the waffle parties were a pretty good part of it. It was everything else around it, you know? Love the waffle parties.
Did they have people in animal masks and lingerie?
Animal masks, yes. Lingerie, not that I'm aware of. It's possible.
So we do get this episode that I think does. It's very interesting in the way that it's handled. It's fun to see the innies in a new environment and how they react to it. It's also fun to have the secret book of Kier being revealed to them.
Yeah.
It's almost like a cult initiation to a new level of the cult, right? As you're revealing more religious secrets. I think that's a nice touch with the religion that they've already brought into the show, and the intertwining of spirituality with the corporate culture that is Lumon. So I liked all of that. Yeah,
and we get our first main character death of the show, essentially. I don't really count Petey. He was, he's kind of a means to an end, but in an effective sense, Irving dies during this episode, right? He attacks Helly Egan, and because he knows it's her, he figures it out, because she would never be, the real Helly would never be as cruel as Egan is.
Son of a bitch! What the fuck? She's an outie! Hey! Irving, cut it out! Stop! She's been an outie the whole time! Ever since she came back! Irving! You stop! No!
And then they effectively fire him, which kills his innie, essentially. Kills as in, that existence has ended, right?
But has it? Because if he's put in a severed environment again, if he's in that geolocated space, doesn't he come back? Is the question?
Sure, and maybe that'll happen next season.
It
But
will
for
happen.
all intents and purposes, he is dead. I mean, the characters have a funeral the next episode, everything like that. So
He's coming back, baby.
that's totally possible, and I would definitely love to see him come back because obviously he's a great actor too. But like, it's important for the purpose of the story that the innie characters see him as having essentially died, right? They do have a funeral for him, so it is. I would say that's our first main character death of the series, even though obviously it's very easy to reverse in this situation. Then again, he does kind of leave on a train to heaven. I don't know where at the end of the near the end of the season. So
He'll be
who
back.
knows? They kind of did just train him off into the sunset too. So
Well, but they didn't kill him, which is what
No.
Christopher Walken's character was supposed to do.
Bon voyage. Buddy. Bert.
He was effectively, it turns out, on his outie was a Lumon. Even if he wasn't the hitman, he was a hitman facilitator. Let's put it that way.
was a driver,
he drove
yeah.
people to where the hitmen got rid of people for Lumon, which is what he was supposed to do to Irving's outie. And then he eventually decides just to tell him to get on a train and get the hell out of there. And
he was like DoorDash for hitmen. Yeah,
he delivers
brought
the
somewhere.
goods to the hitman.
Make sure you tip your driver. Yeah. But John Turturro, like I agree that he's too big of an actor and he's too good in that character to not bring back. But when they do it, it'll probably be a fun moment, you know?
Yeah.
But, again, as far as our innie characters are concerned, he has died at this point in the series.
But yeah, I think at least his outie is going to be back because his outie was already highly suspicious and investigating Lumon.
Oh, totally, yeah.
And also, it appeared that he had already begun to reintegrate because he was his outie was painting the doorway down to the second the floor where Gemma's being kept. So it feels like he may actually have an option to reintegrate more fully, which then would unkill his innie, as it were.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. We have Miss Wong too, right? Who is like for a lot of the season, I think we were all trying to figure out what was going on there. Was it like a severed person? Somehow they had like an adult in a child's body. Was it a severed child and all that? But then towards the end of the season, you're just like, oh, it's just she's just not severed at all.
She's an
just
intern.
One of those. Yeah, she's just an intern at Lumon. She's just in the cult deeper than everybody else, which is almost worse, right? Because then you've just got this like really depressing scene there. She's getting on the bus and leaving. But like we'll get into all that later. But it was fun going through the season and kind of like guessing what her character's role in all this was. And it ended up being like the most simple explanation possible. But because the show is a show, you're always trying to think of like more complex things it could be, because of the severed technology. So I thought that was fun too. It made me think a lot about something I didn't end up needing to think about, which was, I don't know, it was fun.
So I figure we can talk about some of the more interesting story aspects of this season and characters rather than going episode by episode because a lot of this is basically, there are a few things that happen, and the big story points are obviously what's happening to Gemma. And that goes into the flashback sequences of Mark and Gemma's relationship and fleshing that out. Harmony Cobel and the episode that her backstory is kind of revealed, and it turns out that she is actually the inventor of the Severance technology, which is an interesting twist. And basically, she has given that recognition of the invention of that technology over to the Egan family. And so they have basically hidden the fact that she was the actual creator, and it has been, instead, that glory has been transferred to Jamie Egan. Then I think those are probably the two biggest plot lines. I guess we can talk about Dylan and his relationship with his wife, which is also very interesting. For me, these are the things that stood out from the end of this season.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you kind of hit all of them. I would hit as well. We talked a little bit about the Christopher Walken kind of angle. He's married to Denethor, apparently. I did not see that coming. That was kind of a surprise. Always fun to see him. What's that actor's name again? I'm blanking on him. for some reason. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I don't know. For some reason I can't remember his name at the moment, but I always enjoy seeing him pop up. He brings a lot of gravitas to everything he says. He's just fun to listen to speak, right?
I believe that innies deserve to experience love. I mean it. And I hope it was beautiful.
But who do you want to talk about first? Because I think there's a lot of really interesting character stuff, which is, I mean, it's a very character-driven show, so no big surprise there. I mean, we could just start with, well, probably better to end with Mark, but I think Cobel is a good one to kind of start with because, like you said, she has this sort of interesting background of seeming like she was kind of raised in this like Kier religion, kind of.
Yeah, and she did the same fellowship when she was a kid that Miss Wong is doing now, right? Mm-hmm. She did it at the Ether Factory in the blighted town that no longer has this factory. So she grew up there. People are down on hard times. They're drug dealing ether to each other. It is a literal cold harbor, which, by the way, I was very disappointed that they did nothing with that. They didn't say, hey, this literal cold harbor that she's in relates to the cold harbor file, which at the end seems arbitrarily named, and we don't really even get, I would say, a satisfying resolution of that cold harbor name or symbolism. And I feel like they could have done more with that. This episode, there was also an entire episode about Harmony Cobel, which I felt was a lot of filler to get to the point that she created the Severance technology. And in fact, I find Cobel's arc really quite terrible because the concept that Devin and Mark Scout would go to her is so absurd because there is no way that Devin, who had Cobel lie to her to take care of her child and to provide breastfeeding advice to get close to Mark Scout. Why would Devin in a million years trust Cobel? I realize that part of the issue is that Rengabi, the former Lumon surgeon, Regabi, not Rengabi. Regabi, the former Lumon surgeon who reintegrates Mark. Clearly, Devin would be concerned about Mark reintegrating and the physical effects of that. But surely it would be better to wait out reintegration and have Regabi's help rather than call the person that Devin knows is extremely duplicitous from her personal experience and is a certified religious nut job. Like, that's the thing. That's where this show really threw me, and I really didn't like the direction of it because, again, like what we were talking about earlier with the Helena sleeping with Mark as a means to creating this love triangle, which is an interesting situation, it feels like this was another forced plot point. It feels very contrived and not realistic to create the situation where, can we trust Cobel? Now we have to work with her, right? But there were probably more elegant ways to get to that than Devin basically throwing a fit and insisting that they go to Cobel as if there aren't any other options, which there clearly are when Regabi is like right there.
I agree with you on this one. This was probably my least favorite part of the season, was their decision to just gonna go with Cobel and trust her, because we know that Cobel is now very anti-Lumon because of everything we saw in that backstory episode. So we're like, okay, yeah, we could trust her because we know that she has gone from religious fanatic to like extreme, atheist in a sense, right? Militant, where she's hurt, she's been wronged, she's angry, she wants to get back at them. So we can understand her motivation and put a certain amount of trust that she wants to hurt Lumon. Therefore, will help Mark and Devin in the process. That said, Mark and Devin don't know that. They don't know any of that stuff. So when they went with her, I was like, oh, okay, like, I get why we should kind of feel okay with this because we have omniscient knowledge, but they don't know. Yeah, so all
they know is that
I agree with that.
She was a plant, and Mark's neighbor to spy on him, and then also a breastfeeding consultant for Devon to get closer to the family, and
Briefly
lied about
misplaced her newborn baby too.
Yep.
You know,
and she literally lied about everything ever to Mark Scout's outie and to Devon.
Yeah, no, I'm on board with you for this one. Like I said, my
It's
least
absurd.
favorite part of the season. Yeah, and again, like they tried to make it understandable from an omniscient viewer perspective, but you have to think about it from a limited character knowledge perspective for it to really kind of work. So I think that's one that probably a lot of people just kind of like mentally glossed over because it's like, oh, I know this, so I get it. You know, they tried to reduce the feeling of wrongness, when they went along with her, because we've seen her backstory. But again, the characters don't know that. So, I felt like they needed a little bit more reason for Mark and Devon to go with Cobel. Yeah. It leads to a lot of cool stuff, right? A lot of great dialogue, a lot of fun scenes, but it doesn't, again, very kind of expedited means to an end.
Yeah, but my problem is this. So the Helena sleeps with Mark S scene is really ham-fisted and it's shoehorned in there. But the resulting scene of Helly R and Mark S working through that is really good. And I feel like they wanted to have this scene where Helly R and Mark S talk, and then they engineered a way to get there that isn't very satisfying. In the same way that the Harmony Cobel storyline sets up the access to the cabins, which then has Mark S talking to Mark Scout and the innie and outie going back and forth with the video camera, which is probably one of the best scenes in the entire show, if not the very best scene. And so they have this great idea, and they're like, shit, we're going to have this epic scene. We're going to have this really interesting moment that is totally unique to Severance. It can only happen in this show. How do we get there? Make them ally with Cobel as fast as possible, even if that part doesn't make sense. So the setup is deeply unsatisfying, but the payoff is really good, which is why I'm conflicted about this show.
Right, and that's why I don't feel so bad about it, because the payoff was worth it, I guess, in my mind. Where it's
the ends
like,
justify the means, DoA 2025.
In Severance at least, for this
they
show,
don't.
For this show they do. For me at least, like I said, I wasn't too bothered by it. It stuck out for sure.
The problem is that you have to assassinate the
whatever.
characters in order to do that, which makes the characters less satisfying, even when they have these very interesting moments that are a result of it, right?
Yes, for the Cobel thing, less so for the first thing we talked about for me. I think the Cobel thing, again, was the prime offender of like, okay, what in the world are you thinking? Like, okay, maybe we can guess that Mark's out of his mind and Devon is just ignorant, I guess, is what we're supposed to think. But like, still, no, Devon shouldn't be this ignorant because of all the things you mentioned, I was especially thinking, like, didn't this lady just like misplace your baby as one of the climactic moments of last season where everyone's wondering where she is? Like, it's, again, like, it is a very much means ends justify the means. But again, like, the ends are so good that I'm kind of okay with it, which I normally would not be, but I kind of am, I will not be as down on it as you are, because I just had so much fun watching this season. But I'm not saying you're wrong, but it just doesn't bother me that much.
Bothers me a lot.
In this case, in this one case, I can think of lots of other shows where this bothered me, but then, the payoff just like was not there, but yeah, so Cobel, again, I think a lot of this, it was a long backstory episode, but I would like to believe that there's a lot of setup there for future things too. I hope. We'll see. Did it need a whole episode? Probably not. The same way, did we need an entire episode of Gemma being tortured on the tested floor? I don't think that was. I think
that is actually more interesting, which we'll get into. But
that just
as for the Cobel episode, the problem is, DoA, is that there is so much useless filler in that episode. The entire stuff with her mom and her lying in bed with the breathing tube is so unnecessary and goes nowhere. That episode could have been half as long, and it still would have delivered all of the same emotional resonance and information.
I agree there. Yeah, lots of melodrama.
Yep.
They're
I'm going
trying
to lie
to
in bed with the breathing tube.
we're supposed to develop sympathy for the monster, you know? This is where we see that the beast was once human, right? So it's, you know, it's again, I understand why they're doing it, but I think it dragged on too. Again, episode 7 as well with the Gemma stuff. Like, yeah, we know she's being tortured in the tested floor. We've seen that a couple times, but it just goes on and on and on this episode. And they do a lot of good backstory stuff for her and Mark, which is important. Again, I think to make the payoffs at the end of the season hit harder. So I liked all that stuff, but I felt like it was just a little bit too much like doom and gloom and torture and agony. And I don't like seeing characters just get beat up for an hour, you know? I like a little bit of you know, difference in tone in an episode. And the tone was just grim and depressing. And so it got a little bit long to me, where it's like, okay, I get it. Let's move on, you know? But
I think they really have to hammer that
Mark
point
stuff is
home
good.
with Gemma, though, to raise the stakes, and also because we should assume that the purpose behind what Lumon is doing to Gemma is basically to create a technology where nobody ever has to do something uncomfortable or painful, and that the clear ethics of this, you know, even going to the dentist, nobody likes to do that. So do we split somebody into a million different innies and find out, you know, anybody could have an innie that just goes to the dentist? Is that ethical? Hell no, because you're creating somebody whose only life experiences are going to the dentist, which is funny, but also messed up.
Yeah.
And they're
which is part of the dark humor of the show,
yeah,
too.
they're also testing the limits of the technology, which is why Cold Harbor has her taking apart the crib, because they're seeing if there is any bleed from Gemma's real life with the trauma of her miscarriage and the unhappiness of not being able to have kids with Mark Scout.
Perhaps her greatest trauma. Yeah.
Yes, perhaps her greatest trauma, and having her go through the motions of that, but she doesn't recognize that at all. And in fact, the innie that is created in Cold Harbor, which is what we find out is MDR's purpose, is to create these innies, and he is effectively going through and the data of Gemma's mind, as it turns out. That is the great reveal of the season, is what the mysterious and important work of macrodata refinement is. This is the ultimate test, which is like, this is her principal trauma that they are aware of in her life, and will that bleed through? And then ostensibly after that, they were going to kill her before Mark jailbreaks her from the situation.
So my question with all of that then is, since, you know, Mark, all of his work was developing any personality profiles essentially for Gemma, who are the other people working on? Are they different people? Why are they still around? Are they still working on things? You know, like then it's implied that Lumon's killed a lot of people too, because once they've tested enough personalities on someone, they just axe them, I guess. Hence Brienne of Tarth and the lamb room, which comes in, which comes at goat room. Yeah. Which comes in a little bit, again, I feel like it's a little bit Deus Ex Brienne of Tarth here. And I'm like absolutely awful with actor names. So, you know, again, I know this person, I'm going to look it up because I feel bad. I feel bad not remembering what this person, do you remember what her name is?
Not off the top of my
gosh.
head. Gwendolyn Christie.
Terrible, but that's right. I knew, it was on the tip of my tongue. Gwendolyn Christie, right? Who's a great actor, and I think kind of wasted in this because I think she's very good in every single scene she's in and every single show I've seen her in. And so I was hoping we'd get to see more of her when she popped up early on in the season. But it really was so she could kind of show up at the end and beat up a big guy, and that was about it, you know? But that back to what I was saying, you know, that raises kind of the thought that, oh, Lumon's been like doing this for a while and killing people, because it seems like she implies that there's been a lot of baby goats that have gotten taken out here, which means a lot of people have. So how deep does the Lumon murder rabbit hole go? I guess we might find that out next season.
We definitely will. Like, I don't think that any unfortunately, I think that all the questions are intended to be answered in this show, and we're not going to leave anything in terms of gray area, which I find a bit
Seems that way.
disappointing. I know some people just need to hear the end of every single mystery. I hope we don't get the answer to every single mystery in this show. You know, I would have been fine for actually the show to end at the end of season 2, where Gemma, we'll talk about this, where Gemma gets left behind in the stairwell.
I had the same thought. I was like, this could be a series ending scene. Yeah, I actually had that in my notes where I'm like, we could just end the series here and it would be a great series. But we'll get to that. Yeah. I had that same thought.
I do want to go back a little bit and talk about episode 7, Chikhai Bardo, which I think is probably the single best episode of this entire show so far. As much as I've been critical of many of the decisions that have been made, I think this this episode in particular was extremely well done. And what this episode showed was the past relationship of Gemma and Mark. And this is the episode where you have the revelation of what's going on the Lumon testing floor with Gemma as well. But I do want to give a shout out to the director of this episode, whose name is Jessica Lee Gagné. And she has been a cinematographer for a number of years and had previously worked as a cinematographer on other episodes of Severance. But this is the first thing she had ever directed. And what's remarkable about this episode is there are a bunch of really interesting transitions and time lapses. And she actually accomplished this by filming in her house that she was renting while working on Severance. And the house that Gemma and Mark live in the flashbacks is the house she was living in. And what this allowed her to do was to, before and after days of shooting as a cinematographer, she could come back and take time lapses in the morning and evening, which allowed all of these sequences where you see the home of Gemma and Mark changing over time, which was really critical in showing the foundation of their relationship and how things were evolving over time, especially in regards to kind of their failed attempt to start a family, which was very heartbreaking. And it was this that allowed them to do that. And she was filming this on film, so not digitally, which gives it a different quality. And it was a 16 millimeter camera, I believe, that she was using at the house in order to film the flashback sequences, which give the look
very cool
they give the look of the flashbacks a more, I would say, warm feeling than we've seen in other parts of this show. And the other thing that was pretty amazing, Doa, was that the camera shot of them going from MDR through the cables down to the testing floor was not done with any CGI whatsoever, which if you watch that shot is astounding that they did that practically. And honestly, the way that Jessica Lee Gagné handles the emotion of the relationship between Gemma and Mark, the way she handles the scene at the end when the police come to tell Mark of Gemma's death, and the way the lighting is on his face where it's kind of half shadowed, this is brilliantly directed. They show time lapse on people's faces using different colors of light. And you do get the sense, and I think what's wonderful about this is you do get the sense of how a relationship actually is, which is that it's all of these days that's kind of, merge together. But there are distinct milestones in terms of the start of their relationship, their marriage, Gemma's miscarriage, which was deeply affecting them trying to prepare this house to have a baby, and then that actually not happening in the end, and how the relationship evolves into them being shorter with each other, and in fact adversarial in some ways, just because of their mutual heartbreak. But instead of sharing that moment, they end up kind of taking it out, or Mark especially, I think, ends up kind of taking it out on Gemma.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
Gemma, they don't really have a good conversation that we see about this. And it shows how, especially with the time lapses, that these little aspects of a relationship can kind of add up over time, and if they aren't addressed, then the relationship starts to turn a little bit toxic, right? And I think it's just emotionally incredibly well handled. But in spite of all of that, and in spite of the fact that the marriage is somewhat of a blur within the episode, you still feel the incredible sadness of that moment when Mark realizes that Gemma has died.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's a beautifully directed piece, and it's just the pacing is so good. And I think for a first-time director, it is handled immensely well visually. She gets a ton out of the actors' performances. We finally get to see Adam Scott and her name, Deacon Lockman, excuse me, Deacon Lockman, really just come into their own as actors, and they're given so much to do in this episode and for the remainder of the season, and the performances are extraordinary.
Yeah. The Mark and Gemma stuff was really good. Like I said, that episode annoyed me with just the sheer volume of like Gemma torture there was. Again, it's just not something I enjoy, watching, but the relationship stuff was good. And that part of it honestly hit me very hard because I've been through basically everything that they kind of went through in that episode as far as trying to start a family and all that. And not to get too real here for a moment, but a lot of that stuff is very accurate. And when you go through something like that, you really have to come together as a couple like you never have before to make it through that. And as the guy, you have to be especially like, okay, I can't experience fully, what is happening here on a physical level, and I just have to really be there for that person and really like try my best to understand both my own side of things but also their side of things as fully as I can. Otherwise, it gets pretty rough pretty fast. So that especially, I think they did a very good job of making it extremely accurate, again, which is tough to watch, but I have a lot of respect for that too, that they knew what they were talking about there. Like I said, with that episode, I just didn't enjoy all the testing floor stuff as much, just because I was like, yeah, we get it. Let's move on to more of the relationship stuff, like you said, which I thought was great. So, but that's interesting about the director. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
it's cool.
I also disagree about the testing floor stuff. I think the different situations really hammer home this point, and I think that will come into even greater relief when it's shown that that's what Lumon is trying to do, right? There is some sort of religious directive within Lumon from the Egans about eliminating people's pain, and they think the ends justify the means of creating all of these innies that are effectively tortured through, I would say, minor inconveniences. And, what I think there's a lot of ethical questions about that, including how can the outie be a real person if every discomfort / pain in their life is taken away? How do you become a resilient human being?
I kind of hope it's like not that completely. And it kind of seems like it's going to be, but because anyone with like a shred, I think of moral compass would think twice about this and not just see that it was a world without pain, right? You need to kind of, I think, have a foundation of, essentially fundamentalist views of humanity to accept that as a world without pain, So I am curious if this is just, how would they ever think most of humanity would go along with this? I still think this whole Lumon thing is, although they do kind of mention Lumon being worldwide,
it is,
but
it's
maybe
a massive global corporation.
So it's kind of almost like if something like Scientology or whatever had gone fully mainstream, in that the majority of people bought into this. That's kind of the situation I'm wondering if we're going for, because there's no other way you can expect most of humanity to like be okay with this, right? So
I would also say that
reason
just because
there,
they're experimenting on it doesn't mean that this is the version that they would roll out for the average consumer. Right? Maybe
Possibly.
They don't do the dentist thing, but they do the childbirth thing, which they're obviously already testing with people, right? So there's how far this goes in terms of its practical application is not necessarily unveiled yet. What we do know is what they're experimenting on and what they can theoretically do, which I think is also interesting.
That kind of brings to mind the one of the overall kind of things with the show is that we really still don't really know much about the world the show is taking place in. We don't know what era it is. We don't know what year it is. We don't know the geopolitical state of things. It seems like it's a very different version of our world, right? If
Well,
Lumon
it
is
also takes
global
place
and
in
all
a
stuff is out there.
fictional state because the license is, say, PE as the two-letter abbreviation. So we know it takes place in America, but it doesn't take place in an actual state. So it is an abstracted alternate reality.
Or it's an alternate America. That's what I'm kind of wondering if that's what we're going to end up seeing. Is that at some point in our history things deviated timeline wise from what we know and resulted in this. That's my theory. But I think what you were talking about brought that up in my mind as like something I'm very curious about this show overall. It's kind of like if you this show keeps reminding me of Lost, in that there are some big overall mysteries that are there but never really addressed, more than just a license plate or something like that, right? And then there's the smaller mysteries that are either season mysteries or episode mysteries or character mysteries, tons and tons of mysteries, right? And this show has that same thing where it's like there's going to be big seasons long ones where it's multiple seasons of wondering what's up with a certain thing. Like, what is the world like outside of where our characters are? Clearly it's probably not what we know. But then there's the smaller mysteries of what does the Cold Harbor File do, which is like a 2-season long mystery, I guess, So I feel like, again, the only show I ever saw do that type of thing really, really well was Lost, and they kind of fumbled the ball at the end with that one. But the early seasons,
They also did it badly, it turns out.
Well, I mean, they did it well at first, so which I'm hoping this show can follow through, right?
The thing with Lost, and I think the way it differentiates between Severance, is that allegedly, I mean, we can only go by what the people who work on Severance are saying, but we know from what they say that they have a plan for everything in this show, that it has been entirely pre-planned. The problem with Lost is that they didn't have a plan and they were winging it.
Famously,
they planted the seeds of the mystery and then figured out how to deal with it later. I would say didn't figure out how to deal with it later. But they were famously flying by the seats of their pants, whereas this feels much better crafted from the start.
I think they juggled the spinning plates well for like the first 2 to 3 seasons or so.
Yeah. And then it
Lost,
entirely came off the rails. Yes.
So again, like I'm waiting for season 3 of Severance. We're going to see where things are at towards the end of season 3. And I feel like that's my kind of benchmark for like, okay, is this show gonna really make it, right? Cause that's a long time. That is so much time to make 3 seasons of a television show and then to go on potentially with a 4th, like, and keep the level of suspense and drip feeding of information in an entertaining way going. That is a lot of spinning plates to keep spinning, And maybe even this season again they fumbled a couple of them, right? Which are having to kind of make some jumps to get from point A to point B. Overall, again, I think it's still really, really good. But yeah, one does wonder, right?
So I do want to talk about the end of this season and what happens, which is all set up by the plan to get Mark's innie and outie to work together to rescue Gemma because of the nature of his, basically the way Mark has been severed. They can't wait for him to.
1 second. Before we get into this, do we want to talk about Milchick and Dylan? Because I feel like they
Sure.
both, for separate reasons, they weren't talking about it. I want to talk about the ending. I would love to dive into that. But I do feel like both Dylan's character story and Milchick's character story deserve mentioning because they were both good in a unique way. I feel like Milchick we got a little bit less of, but the cracks are starting to show where he is not as satisfied with Lumon as you think. And I think the really fascinating thing about his character is that I feel like I had this realization where the waffle parties, the dancing, the music, that's him really being himself. That's the real Milchick, is enjoying singing and dancing and hanging out with people and being friends. This Lumon, this Lumon enforcer, essentially, that he has to be for his job seems like the thing he likes to do the least. He doesn't seem to have that fanaticism that the others do, really. And so it's almost like the opposite of the innie outie thing, where when he gets to go and do these corporate party things, or the marching band, for instance, or, you know, even to a lesser extent, his insult comedy routine with Kier, I feel like that's where he really gets to be the person he wants to be and enjoys being, you know? And he's kind of becoming that person a little bit more and standing up to the Lumon people more. And I just love that about his character, that he's almost the reverse innie outie, where like his corporate internal fake quote unquote self is secretly who he kind of enjoys being the most, you know?
I also like the fact that they're trying to control his language and making him less articulate, because, you know, famously, the way to control somebody's thoughts is to control their language. And that way you can kind of, over time, start to exert your power over their internal monologue and over their thoughts. And Lumon is trying to do that by making him less eloquent. And that is both funny because I find his dialogue very amusing, and his resistance to that is fun. Right. It's fun. And you can see how insidious Lumon is, because they want to make things simple so that he follows commands and he doesn't actually think about the subtleties of things. And that ends up getting him in trouble. Right.
Devour feculence. It means eat shit, Mr. Drummond.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, he's kind of his own person, right? He's not that Lumon sort of drone that they want him to be, you know, and his lexiphonical way of speaking bothers them a little bit, right? Because they have, even Drummond, like, clearly just has trouble understanding what he's saying, because he is that brainwashed enforcer, right? That they want Milchick to kind of be. So I think while that character gets great scenes here and there, he's actually like the character that I feel like I wanted more of this season and didn't get enough of. But maybe that's because we're heading towards like a big payoff. I think he's going to kind of do the villain to hero kind of thing and join up with our rebels eventually. That seems kind of the direction that he's going. But again, like, I think the realization when you go back and look at the season 1 stuff and like the dance scene where he ends up getting bit by Dylan at the end of it, like, where he seems so happy and you're like, how can this person be so fake? And it's like, no, he was actually really being himself in that scene. He really was enjoying dancing with them, you know? I think that's great. Yeah. So more Milchick next season, please. On to Dylan. Dylan, holy cow, that is like one of the most kind of, it feels very messed up, but it has one of the most kind of pleasant, satisfying, kind of feel good sort of conclusions compared to some of the other storylines. What did you think about Dylan in the season?
I think the most interesting stuff is obviously when his Audie's wife is visiting him in the room, and they're using that as a way to manipulate Dylan so that he is more compliant. And again, this is one of the things that is unique to Severance, is that they can explore a love triangle, just like they did with the innie and outie of Helena. They can explore the love triangle with the innie and outie of Dylan and what that means. And also it goes back to what is kind of the same about the innies and outies. What is the core aspects of somebody's character that remain, whether they've been severed or not? And in fact, the world beating down Dylan's outie has left him without confidence and left him without an edge, which makes his wife less attracted to him, right? Whereas the innie is very good at his job, knows that he's good at his job, and is very selfless and noble. We know that about Dylan's innie because he's the one who starts the overtime contingency, right? He's the one who is standing there in the security room holding both handles so that everyone else can experience their outies. He makes noble sacrifices, and he's a interesting character. He seems like he would be fun to be around, his innie, whereas his outie has kind of been beaten down by the world and doesn't have the same verve that the innie has. And so I think that's really interesting, that his wife sees what she loves about Dylan's outie in the innie and is actually more attracted to that in certain ways, which is a
Right.
great character, conundrum.
Or maybe kind of sees how he was when they had first started dating or met or something like that, right? And instead of the person that he's kind of become. So yeah,
And
I
also,
think that's
Dylan's innie is much more passionate because
for sure.
he doesn't have that sexual experience, and whatever it was about his outie's wife that initially attracted him is new and fresh, and he feels that attraction. He wants to express it again, which over time in a marriage or a long-term relationship, you don't have that new love kind of spark anymore, right? Which is intoxicating, and I understand why his wife would want to be treated that way again.
Mm-hmm. Ultimately, though, his innie comes off as very childlike, right? Which kind of freaks her out a little bit and drives her away. The paper ring and everything, and so you also get back to the fact that the innies are effectively children emotionally, and that comes into play. But I really like the end of that, right? Where you wonder, what's going to happen. He tries to quit, obviously. His outie refuses that, but he writes him a letter that says, hey, you're kind of inspiring me by, how you are. And so
you can quit. He says you can quit.
And if you do want to quit, go ahead and do it. But just know that you being there, being the way you are, is helping me out here, is what he's saying, which I kind of think is a nice, we'll see what happens with that. We don't know what Dylan's decision is going to be eventually. He's there for now, but he can kind of quit any time. But it seems like Dylan and his innie have kind of the outie and innie have kind of come to an understanding, essentially, which is the opposite of what happens with Mark, which now I feel like we are prepared to jump into the ending of the season and all of that, because we do have the very different relationships between the innie and outie selves. Dylan and Mark are kind of polar opposites towards the end.
Yeah, and it goes back to the conversation between Mark's innie and outie that we referenced earlier, which is a brilliant scene where they use the birthing cabins and a video camera in order to have the innie and outie speak with each other, because they need them to coordinate. And the reason why they need that is because they can't wait for Mark to fully reintegrate, because they need, Cold Harbor is approaching completion. And we get the sense that if Mark doesn't go to the office to complete it, Lumon will potentially kidnap him and force him to do it, because the Egan family is so desperate to have, and Lumon's so desperate to have this thing finished. And so because the testing floor is outside of the normal severed floor, that means that outie Mark will be on the testing floor. Innie Mark will be on the floor above it, his normal severed floor. And so both of them have to know what is going on in order for them to get Gemma out of this facility, because it's outie Mark's job to get her to the elevator and innie Mark's job to get her to the stairwell.
I love that. I love the
really
whole
good
setup for this episode just being almost kind of like a heist thing, but you're two different kind of sides of yourself, the severed and unsevered side, having to work together to do it. It's such a great episode, and like little plot in construction, and then the way it all plays out is so fun and satisfying. That last episode is just maybe one of my favorite episodes of television ever, I think.
I hope now with all we have in common, that you'll give me that chance.
Yeah, and you understand, too, what's so interesting about the conversation between Mark's innie and outie is that the innie totally should not trust Mark's outie, and also has no emotional connection to Gemma. So why does he care about that when he cares about his own romantic interest in Helly? And so it is like having two different people, which is the intention, right? Because when the severance happened, their lives went in two different directions, and they don't have the same motives any longer. So why should innie Mark sacrifice his own potential romantic relationship, his own life, in order to facilitate the escape of this woman and the happiness of outie Mark, whom he does not give a shit about?
Right. And again, you're dealing with people at different emotional development levels too, right? Where innie Mark is, again, immature, childlike. Outie Mark tries to explain to him that his relationship, that innie Mark's relationship is, he basically kind of says it in a nice-ish way where it's like, this is just a cheap high school romance kind of thing. This isn't real, kid, where versus I've been with this person for years, we've had all this stuff happen,
Like thousands of days of like joy and arguments and passion. Then you can see why I have to get my wife back. I have to have her back.
But
at the end, his argument is just
that.
Trust me, bro. To
Exactly.
Innie Mark.
Well, what else do you
just
do?
Trust me, bro.
If you're
I'm not
trying
gonna
to
kill you.
explain, if you're trying to explain to a high schooler that the breakup that they just suffered isn't the worst thing in the entire universe, that there's they'll date other people, it's fine. That's not going to make a difference to that high schooler that's going through that moment right there. And so that's kind of the situation with outie Mark and innie Mark is outie Mark is trying to use maturity and experience to convince innie Mark that things are a certain way, and innie Mark doesn't have any of that and can't comprehend it, and is again thinking of themselves and not going to do it. So yeah, you've got characters that are just kind of incompatible of really understanding each other despite being the same person, but yet they're still able to kind of like come to this agreement and put this plan together to sort of go for it.
What do you want from me? We are in this together. Can't you just trust me? No.
And it doesn't turn out the way that, anyone's expecting per se, but it is very entertaining. Just the whole going through that, like the the stuff with Drummond where we get our first real fight scene, where Drummond's like, I'm just going to beat the crap out of this guy because it's time. He's seen too much, where maybe innie Mark is going to die, right? Then Brienne of Tarth shows up. It's the character that comes to mind. But saves the day essentially with the little piston gun to kill the lamb.
Bolt gun.
The bolt gun. Is that what that's called?
It's a goat.
Oh, it's a goat. Whatever. Baby goat, baby sheep. They look the same pretty much. Anyway, but I love the scene, and this is one of the darker humor moments of the series where Mark has Drummond. He's got the bolt gun to his neck, and they go down the elevator, and he's like in the middle of telling him how he's going to do what he says, and then when he goes through the severance kind of like change, he accidentally kills him, and so outie Mark just appears with like Drummond just bleeding all over him.
It is very funny.
It is this hilarious like dark comedy moment where that especially because outie Mark is not the type of person to ever kill anyone, right? And so but then he's in this situation, and it's the whole scene is just great. That whole sequence, the whole episode is just awesome.
I'm gonna change to my outie, and then you are gonna take him to...
Yeah. And it ends in a very interesting, like we had season 1 end on a cliffhanger, and we get a cliffhanger ending of season 2.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will not have to wait 3 years before season 3 this time around, given the popularity of this show. But
Probably
the
not.
fact that innie Mark does complete the mission of getting Gemma to the stairwell, but Gemma, by the way, who's Miss Casey for a temporary amount of time until they get her into the stairwell, and then comes back to Gemma again. She is watching Mark, who she has been obviously longing for, on the testing floor. And at that point in time, she sees him running away, and he's trying to then save himself and Helly R, and their innies, and preserve that relationship. So you do get the kind of competing... The competing motivations of Mark's innie and outie to end this season.
Yeah, and you get kind of multiple satisfying moments, multiple completion moments with both characters, where you do get that great moment where outie Mark and outie Gemma are together again. They know who each other are. Obviously he thought she was dead. She was kidnapped and didn't know if she'd ever escape, and so they get this great moment together, the big hug and kiss and all that kind of stuff. But then you get that other really satisfying ending too, where innie Mark does, like you're saying, complete the mission, but then decides to do the selfish thing and preserve himself essentially, and stay with Helly instead. And then they're just running off into the bowels of Lumon. Who even knows where they're going? And they don't look happy at the end of the freeze frame because like they don't know where they're going. They know they're in mortal peril essentially. And so, how do they even think they made a good decision or not? They're just running off.
Covered in blood.
Yeah, covered in blood. And you just have no idea how deep does the Lumon rabbit hole go? How do they think they can escape, within Lumon? Where will they go? It's a great cliffhanger for sure.
Of your mind.
And there are unresolved plot elements still, many of them. Probably how did Gemma live is that one. Did we know from previously in the show that Mark says that he identified Gemma's body, but was this a hoax? Was she kidnapped by Lumon instead? Did they have some sort of fake body for him to view and confirm her death so that they could run these experiments? But also to that point, DoA, if they did kidnap her, how did they know that the result of that would be Mark joining Lumon and getting severed? Right? Because that happened after her death as a way to cope with her death. Did they? Did they engineer that in some way? Did they implant that idea in his mind? Because how
did
could
they need Mark
known?
to complete those files? Could anyone have been like?
That's true.
Because I think that's how I see it. Is like technically anyone could have completed those files. Like I don't expect that Dylan.
Maybe
and
Mark
Irving
was better at completing it. Could have done it faster.
Maybe yeah, but I don't think it's ever implied that you need to be working on the files of someone you knew. I think it's just coincidence more than anything else, which sure there can be coincidence in the world.
Or do you have to know somebody? And so did the other macro data refiners, did Dylan and Irving do this to somebody that they knew at one point in time, right?
Yeah. And, was there some sort of subtle manipulation of Mark to get him to choose to be severed, right? Was there a plan? Maybe that's something we'll see in season 3. Who knows? But as far as going back to the ending of season 2, being something that's satisfying as an ending of the series overall, I think it really is. I mean, in a classic science fiction sense, where you have the payoffs of Gemma has been rescued. Like, so that is something you want to see as someone consuming the story. Like, you want to see her get rescued. She does. But, right, there's this bittersweet ending to it where he goes off. But again, it's because of the the malign effects of this technology, which is a very like sci-fi story thing to do, where there's victory, but there's also a price to be paid because of the technology that humans are trying to harness that they're not ready to harness, or they're doing incorrectly. Like, it's a great like I said, it's a great bittersweet science fiction ending to a story. So if they just end it right there, I would actually be fine with that. I would actually be fine with that. Yeah, they're just running off, And I frankly don't think a lot of shows have are bold enough to end a story like that anymore. I don't think it's possible for shows to do that. Clearly, it's not for this one because we're getting a 3rd season. I'm looking for the 3rd season. I'm sure it's going to be good. And again, it wasn't written to end there, so I get that. But I would like to see more things like that where there is a satisfying, conclusion that also leaves you with a little bit of sadness and regret too. Because again, I think with science fiction, that's a great way to tell a story that tries to communicate some sort of like moral position on technology. So
I'm all for ambiguous endings, and I think that's going to be one of the disappointing aspects that we have to deal with Severance, is that this show is just going to explain everything. That's the goal of this show. And I don't think that's the most artistic way for this show to exist, but I do think that is how they're going to do things, and that's just going to be that. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that, if this show had ended on that note, I would be happy about it. If they find other ways to make an ending ambiguous like this one, or to leave it on a cliffhanger, I'm fine with that. But I just don't think they're going to have the balls, DoA. I don't think they're going to have the balls to do it.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think a lot of any shows are really capable of doing that right now. I don't think audiences right now want that kind of thing. They want everything wrapped up neatly in a little bow. Like I said, my only ask for the end of Severance, whenever it happens, is that it doesn't end up in some sort of Age of Ultron thing where we're fighting a bunch of Lumon zombie soldiers and all that. Like we have like Mark with a machine gun. Like, dude, no, let's just not do it. In fact, that bolt gun thing was the very first weapon we saw in the entire series, and I liked that. I really liked that. It's a show that can get by without having people swinging swords at each other, shooting guns, and all that kind of stuff. It can get by just on the tension and the dialogue and a little bit of fisticuffs now and then. I like that. So I hope it it keeps that approach when it comes to weapons.
I also hope it stays focused on the characters and doesn't get into some sort of giant earth-spanning geopolitical drama. This show needs to stay, when it's most successful, it's fleshing out the character arcs. It's examining Gemma and Mark's relationship. It's Mark S. and Helly. This is where it is most effective. And I really am praying it doesn't turn into a political thriller. Please.
Well, from a storytelling perspective, you can be big by staying small too, where you can have it be a small character-driven story, but yet have big implications, right? I mean, look at look at Star Wars: A New Hope, right? It's about, Luke basically starting on his journey to learn about the Force, right? And it's a very kind of personal story where even right to the very end where he has to make that personal decision to trust the Force instead of the technology, but it leads to blowing up the Death Star, right? So small personal stories that lead to big, big things, and so you can absolutely do that.
I just don't want this to turn into some sort of jet setting to every single Lumon office and the world governments getting involved. I would like it to stay in here. And the implication is that this is earth-changing technology, and how do the characters react to that, and can they dismantle it, right?
Right.
But I agree. Keep it focused on the characters. That's when it's most successful. And also, please, my final thoughts on this is that there was too much filler in this season. A lot of what was excellent about the pacing of season 1 was lost here, and then also it felt like some of the big character decisions only existed to set up concepts that they wanted and were not decisions that characters would have reasonably made, and felt very, very forced.
That said, I think the ends justified the means, for me at least. I know there was they did rush it a little bit here and there, filler and stuff but I don't care. I think that was a great season of prestige television, MonteCristo, and I'm all for season 3. I mean, Adam Scott is just absolutely crushing it. Like, it is one of the best performances I've seen, and it's a joy to watch, right? And
especially from a guy who was more known previously for his dry humor and deadpan comedy performance. Yeah. And now him emerging as this excellent dramatic actor is surprising. In a way, it's kind of like Bryan Cranston and Breaking Bad.
Yeah. And who would have thought? One of his first roles was as a cool bully on Boy Meets World, and now here he is on Severed. What a trajectory for Adam Scott. Pretty awesome.
All right, guys, that'll wrap it up. I'm sure we'll be back for season 3 with Severance.
Oh, yeah.
Hopefully not 3 years from now. We will be back next week with more 1980s fantasy. It's time, DoA, for Arnold Schwarzenegger and Conan the Barbarian, an 80s classic. We're still in 1982. By the way, if you guys didn't watch the episode on Dragon Slayer because you hadn't heard of it, I would recommend going back and checking out that episode, because that is a shockingly good movie, and I think many of you probably haven't heard of it and would really enjoy that. So first off, watch the movie. Second off, watch the Nerd Legion episode on Dragon Slayer. And we'll see you next week for Conan the Barbarian.
All right.